Tuesday, World Economic News will start in the United States with Grigor, US. California and Janet Yellen will drive the next round of QE. So that would be QE3. Janet Yellen is the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. Ms. Yellen is from California. In California, no economic recovery is taking place. This spring, the Federal Reserve will need to decide on a continuation of QE. To guide the Fed on future QE, I believe Ms. Yellen is already looking at charts such as the kind displayed on the website, which is this one, California's employment in millions, and it speaks for itself. The Baltimore Sun, for older, out-of-work residents, the future looks grim. One of these meet the real people examples. Kathleen Harwell can't imagine what life on the streets would be like for a 59-year-old woman with diabetes and high blood pressure, but she's afraid she'll soon find out. After nearly 2 years without work and no luck finding a job, the Laurel resident is on the brink of homelessness. She has run out of savings and unemployment benefits. She's too young for Social Security, and she's not the only one in this frightening fix. A burgeoning group of older, jobless people here and nationwide have found everything they worked for over the decades snatched away by the sharp downturn and slow recovery. Laid-off workers in their 50s and 60s and older are facing grim prospects of finding a new job, the worst for any age group in the at least five recessions. At a time when hardly anyone is finding re-employment easy or quick. It must be quite terrible, that 59. And you just run out in the United States, don't you? That's it. If you've got no savings and you've exhausted everything else, that's it. You're out on the streets. It's a frightening thing. Be nice to people on the way up. What do they say? Yeah, might need them on the way down. Wall Street Journal. Global price fears mount, but this is principally an interview with ECB, European Central Bank boss. So in an interview with the Wall Street Journal ahead of this week's annual meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Jean-Claude Trichet warned that inflation pressures in the Eurozone must be watched closely and urged central bankers everywhere to ensure that higher energy and food prices don't gain a foothold in the global economy. I'm reading that because that's quite odd in its own little way, isn't it? Trichet warned inflation pressures in the Eurozone must be watched closely and urged central bankers everywhere to ensure that higher energy and food prices don't gain a foothold in the global economy. As though the central banks of the world can do something about it. And well, if they can do something about it, boy, are they powerful people. This is later. 3, 2, 1. Hello, Tuesday World Economic News will start in the United States with Grigor, US. And California and Janet Yellen will drive the next round of QE. Janet Yellen is the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. Ms. Yellen is from California. In California, no economic recovery is taking place. This spring, the Federal Reserve will need to decide on the continuation of QE, QE3 or not to QE3. To guide the Fed on further QE, I believe Ms. Yellen is already looking at charts such as the kind displayed on the website. California's employment in millions 2000 to 2010, which speaks for itself. The Baltimore Sun: for older, out-of-work residents, the future looks grim. This is a personal story. Kathleen Harwell can't imagine what life on the streets would be like for a 59-year-old woman with diabetes and high blood pressure, but she's afraid she'll soon find out. After nearly 2 years without work and no luck finding a new job, the Laurel resident is on the brink of homelessness. She has run out of savings and unemployment benefits. She's too young for Social Security, and she's not the only one in this frightening fix. A burgeoning group of older, jobless people here and nationwide have found everything they worked for over the decades snatched away by the sharp downturn and slow recovery. Laid-off workers in their 50s and 60s and older are facing grim prospects of finding a new job, the worst for any age group in at least 5 recessions, at a time when hardly anyone is finding re-employment easy or quick. It must be quite terribly frightening for somebody 59 years old, because it happens in the United States, doesn't it? You run out of savings and your unemployment benefits and you've got nothing. It's not quite like that in Europe. The Wall Street Journal gives us global price fears mount, and this is principally about an interview with the Wall Street Journal ahead of this week's annual meeting in Davos of the World Economic Forum with Jean-Claude Trichet, the boss man at the Euro Central Bank. He writes, Trichet warned that inflation pressure in the Eurozone must be watched closely. Fair enough. And urged central bankers everywhere to ensure that higher energy and food prices don't gain a foothold in the global economy. It's amazing what power these central bankers either have or think that they have, that he's warning central bankers everywhere to ensure that higher energy and food prices don't gain a foothold in the global economy. How are they going to do that? And if they can do that, they are very powerful people. Later in the interview we get, that implies the ECB, European Central Bank, could raise rates this year. I don't think so. Token gesture, maybe. Could raise rates this year if it senses that companies and workers expect headline inflation to stay above 2% for some time, even if the main source of inflation is world commodity markets. I've pushed this a couple of times, this central bank, and its universal central bank idea that commodity inflation can come in through prices of bread and a 6-pack of beer. But as soon as the workers in the country that the central bank is of start demanding extra wages in order to stay ahead of the bread and 6-pack of beer prices, then the central bank will act to quell what is described as their expectations. In other words, the central bank is always trying to keep the workers' wages not getting ahead of inflation. And it's a very strange thing, because if you look at it from a slightly different angle, the central bank's always trying to make the worker poorer. I'm sure that's not quite the angle that they look at it from, but it is the actual effect of what they do. Later, Mr. Trichet argues that budget discipline would help growth in Europe more than renewed stimulus. That's quite important. Important line, I'll just repeat. Mr. Trichet argues that budget discipline, that's austerity type things, would help growth in Europe more than renewed stimulus. That's quite a flip-flop. And called on the Eurozone's 17 member countries to strengthen surveillance of each other's fiscal policies. What sort of talk is that? Called on the Eurozone's 17 member countries to strengthen surveillance of each other's fiscal policies. Very odd. In Europe, budget discipline benefits growth and job creation by improving confidence in households, enterprises, investors and savers, said the 68-year-old Frenchman. It's like the Germans have got his mind and totally twisted it. In Europe, budget discipline, austerity again, benefits growth and job creation. It's going to be interesting to see how that might happen. Later, we get struggling countries on the Eurozone's fringe, including Greece, Ireland and Portugal, face an extended period of economic pain. No doubt. They must raise taxes and cut spending to reduce government debt while holding wages down to make their products more price competitive. That's internal devaluation. At the other extreme, Germany's mix of rapid export-driven growth and tumbling unemployment usually puts central bankers on edge because it often leads to rising wages and prices. That's the rising wages again that central bankers want to keep down. Other Eurozone countries such as France are somewhere in the middle. Their economies are recovering but growth remains uneven with unemployment high. Unemployment's always high in France. Mr. Trichet dismisses these divergences as normal, because they are, and similar to those among states and regions in the United States. But the United States and other large economies have big federal budgets that can channel funds from prosperous areas to those that have fallen on harder times. Europe doesn't have a central fiscal authority, putting pressure on the ECB to stabilize a diverse set of economies with one interest rate tool. So hopefully you've got a flavour of quite a few of the central bank and European problems from that interview. The whole thing obviously is worth reading, but I've done my best to bring you the flavour of it. Der Spiegel International Online. Eurogroup leaders exhorts Germany to expand the rescue fund. This is the EFSF rescue fund thing. The influential head of the Eurogroup 17 countries that have adopted Europe's common currency is warning that Germany must move to expand the money available in the EU rescue package to save the euro. Luxembourg Prime Minister Jean-Claude Juncker said he is angry about the tone of the discussion of the euro rescue in some parties. Germany. Jean-Claude Juncker, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg and President of the Eurogroup, has warned the German government that it must take part in the planned reform of the European Union's Euro rescue package. It's now inevitable that we will have to effectively make available the 440 billion euro that we tentatively promised last May, Juncker told Der Spiegel in an interview to be published Monday. I am confident the German government will not ignore this common European goal. So the common European goal is to spend Germans' money. It's not a bad idea. FT Alphaville, Wilhelm Buiter, used to work for the Bank of England and has done so much good work. Works for Citigroup now, don't hold that against him, used to work for the Financial Times. Buiter on Europe's secret liquidity operations. Wilhelm Buiter wants you to familiarize yourself with the ELA, that is Emergency Liquidity Assistance that the Eurozone's national central banks are able to provide their local banks under some legal fuzziness in the Eurozone. The acronym has managed to grab a few headlines over in Ireland, and that's Boita's detailed look at how the Irish Central Bank can print money from nowhere, out of the clutches of the European Central Bank. And it's a tricky little thing, and if it catches on as a game to play, that's going to explode everything. Obviously what the ECB is saying, well, as long as only Little Ireland does it, it's all right. But you can guarantee if they get away with it, others will want to try the trick. Narma Wine Lake, this is staying in Ireland. Narma is the bad bank, easy way of putting it, in Ireland to get rid of a lot of the bad loans that were on the books of the dreadful banks. Article entitled Circus Maximus, Credibility de Minimis. The author at the end of it writes, this is really only be understood by the Irish people probably, but it's of note. This confusion, and you'd have to read the article to see exactly what the confusion is, instills suspicion that major changes to Narma are afoot. And remember yesterday that the Taoiseach referred to two key pieces of legislation that needed to be enacted: the Finance Bill, which was published on Friday last, and an amendment to the Narma Act. Yes, indeed, there may well be some important changes afoot at Narma. Last paragraph of the article was, so as entertaining as the present circus is, it should be remembered that we are being viewed by outsiders on whom we depend for finance, deposits, ECB liquidity assistance, IMF, EU bilateral aid, and these present performances are undermining credibility and specifically perceived political stability. It is to be hoped that these present tricks by political animals can be drawn to a speedy conclusion, and the desperate needs of our economy can take centre stage again. He knows that's a futile thing to ask for. It's gone beyond a joke in Ireland, in my opinion, and they've got nothing but silly games left to play. Sorry, Ireland, but I can't see any way out. And there's no way that I can see the EU can even help anymore. It's just too dire. On Counterpunch, we've got Michael Hudson and Jeffrey Summers writing an article, The Myth of the Baltic Tigers, the Death of Social Europe. And it's a classic Michael Hudson article. It's quite long and detailed, but if you like Michael Hudson, the link's on the website. It is worth a read, and it's so sad what's going on. But it's desperate, so it's desperately sad. Credit write-downs, gold bullion bottleneck or supply deficit. And Jeff Clark from Big Gold has tried via credit write-downs to write a sensible article here. There have been numerous reports of bullion shortages in many parts around the world, along with rising premiums. And the two explanations, we're running out of gold and it's just a manufacturing bottleneck, are at odds with one another. So who's right? And they do a lists of who might be right and reasons for it. It's quite an analytical article on it, and anybody interested in gold it's a good read just for the sake of it. I've picked out just number 3 in the second block of bullet points, because it's an interesting one for anybody really to know about the size of gold investments. Gold and mining stocks represented 20% of all global assets in 1932. So in 1932, the gold and gold mining stocks, stocks and shares of gold miners, 20% of all global assets in 1932. There were 26% of all global assets in 1981, which I found was quite a shockingly large number. 26% of all global assets were held in gold or gold mining stocks in 1981. I imagine that was at the peak of the spike. And today, gold and gold mining shares represent only about 1% of global assets. All very interesting. Leave you with it. Hope this wasn't too long for you. But if you stay to the end, it probably wasn't. Thanks, bye.